Emmaus, for them, may not just have been a village, but it may have been a condition of going to a situation and a circumstance that sometimes all of us maybe have the temptation to go toward. Frederick Buechner, a religious novelist, has said that the place, Emmaus, is the place we go in order to escape. Maybe a bar, maybe a movie, whatever it is, we may throw up our hands and say, just let the whole thing go. Emmaus may be buying a new suit or a new car, reading a second-rate novel, or even writing one. Emmaus may be going to church on Sunday. Emmaus is whatever we do or wherever we go to make ourselves forget all of the difficulties in this world, that even in the wisest and bravest and loveliest decay and die, that even the noblest ideas that people have had, ideas about love and freedom and justice, have always in time been twisted out of shape by selfish people for selfish ends. So Emmaus may have been, it was a destination, it was a village, but it also may have been a condition for these two disciples or followers of Jesus, or at least people who knew about Jesus, were headed toward, because they thought that what was in Jerusalem was going to be behind them, was going to be a situation that they weren't going to be involved with anymore. But here's the good news of this story. Jesus appears and walks with them. One of the resurrection appearances of Jesus was that he came up and walked along with the two going to Emmaus. I love the thought of that, the image of that, the hope of new life, of a new perspective, a new situation, that even though they were still headed toward Emmaus, that Jesus was there walking along with them. And then what I want us to do is just to observe what he did. He came up to the two walking to Emmaus and asked them a question. He said, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" And he didn't tell them who he was. They didn't recognize him or know that it was him. And he asked them the question, and then he listened to what they had to say. First of all, they were amazed that he was they said, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem that doesn't know the things that are happening or happened there these past few days?" The ironic thing, and for those of us who know that it is Jesus talking there and walking with them, the ironic thing is that Jesus was the only one who knew the depth of all that happened there in Jerusalem those days. So he not only asked them that question, but then he asked them another question. What things? He asked them. He asked them to continue to say, what was it? And he began to tell them what they were talking about, that Jesus was a prophet. They thought that he was going to be the one who was going to redeem Israel. They had put their hopes in him. They had followed him. They had put their trust in him. And they thought he was the one who was going to come into a position of redeeming Israel from the power of Rome that had Israel in its grips. And then they said, and now we get this amazing report that some of the women went to the tomb this morning and found that it was empty, and a vision of an angel that said, "He's not here. He's risen." And then some of the men went and found the empty tomb, but they did not see him. And it's interesting that even they talked about this resurrection, that this empty tomb, they found him, but it gives the impression that they didn't really believe that this was going on. They just said, some people are reporting this, and it's interesting to note that even the report of the resurrection was reported in a down way. What do we do with the news? And what do we do with the news that Jesus has risen? That we are an Easter people, that the church exists to proclaim the possibility of new life and new hope, not only in this world, but in the next. What do we do with the news? How do we live our lives? What's on our faces? What's in our hearts and what's in our souls to communicate to the world and people around us that we are people of the resurrection? Friedrich Nietzsche, a pretty renowned atheist, philosopher, said this: if I'm going to believe in your Redeemer, you all are going to have to look more redeemed. And I think it's important for us to understand that part of what we communicate is our approach to life and the way that we see those things around us. So Jesus walked with them. And then Jesus taught them as they walked. In fact, he said, don't you believe what the prophets said? Here are people who were supposed to know, Jews who were supposed to know what the Old Testament said, that the Christ had to suffer these things and then enter his glory. And so it tells us that as he walked along, he began to explain all of the things, beginning with Moses. He began to explain all of those things that the Old Testament pointed back to, or pointed forward to, rather, to Jesus in the New Testament. And he explained what was in the Scriptures about himself. One of the things that teaches us is that the Old Testament does point to the Messiah, points to Jesus. And it tells us the story of salvation for people who believe in him. That the Old Testament is pointing to the future and that the best is yet to come. And I think it's instructive for us as we live our lives as followers of Jesus Christ and commit ourselves to him, that we are people who are looking forward to those situations and times and circumstances that bring fulfillment and hope in the midst of our own circumstances. To plan for the future, to know where he's leading us in the future. Wayne Gretzky, possibly the greatest hockey player of all time, said, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been. And if you think about it, that's the success of a hockey player, isn't it? Skate where it's going to be, not where it's been. And then I want to just share one other thing about this passage of Scripture today. I noticed in my study of the Scripture this week, one thing that I had frankly never noticed before. And it actually is in verse 17. And let me just read you the whole verse. It says, he asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? That was the first question he asked them, if you remember. And then it says, they stood still. They stood still. And then it talks about their faces being downcast. But one of the things that really jumped out at me was this idea of they stood still. And when Jesus asked them that first question, their response was they stopped walking. They stood still. And if we look at Emmaus as wanting to, and the circumstance of being in those situations where we are wanting to go to the past, wanting to get away, going for whatever it is that we hope will give us new perspective, before we are able to turn around and go back, we first of all need to stand still. Psalm 46:10 says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. To be still and know that I am God. And I think that one aspect of this passage is that when that question was asked, the first thing they did was they stopped. Now they continued walking for a little while, and actually they did get to Emmaus. But next week I'm going to talk about the rest of this story. That there is more to the story as they got to Emmaus. So I want to invite you to come back next Sunday and see what happens in this story. Now I know that's a little bit unfair maybe. Some of you, got plans next Sunday. Change them. Come back. No, I was teasing. But let me just tell you this about next week. They discovered Jesus in Emmaus. And if we think about that being a condition and a place where we're trying to get to, the good news was they discovered Jesus there. Their eyes were open. They saw him there in the midst of that circumstances. And they went back to Jerusalem. Now, I know I'm giving away the story. But I just want you to know that that's coming up. And we're going to talk about that next Sunday. So to back up a second, I'm not sure what your Emmaus is. You may be running headlong toward it. My prayer is that Jesus will meet you there, will walk with you, and at some point that you will stand still to hear his questions. And then at some point you will discover who he is and turn again to go back to where he is and where he's leading you. So as we think about this appearance of Jesus, we think about people on this journey to Emmaus. And my prayer is this week we will discover Jesus in the midst of our journey. He may not let us continue that particular journey. He might have ways of turning us in new directions and moving us in a different way. But let's have fun discovering what that might be for each one of us.